Tonight we're focusing on pages 72 to 136. And before we start, does anyone have any burning comments or statements or stories they would like to share, or anything that came up while they were reading these pages?
I'm taken by how fast paced it is. And like, it seems like, you know, every page there's like a different setting and a different apartment. There's some fight going on, or, you know, somebody being whacked with a tennis racket.
Different characters being introduced.
Different characters, a lot of characters being introduced. So, and I'm just trying to keep, I haven't read all the pages for tonight, but
no, I agree with you. It is like that.
It's just really fast. It almost feels like, I don't know, like it was written for television, you know, and she is a writer, and, you know, she might have been thinking that way.
Yeah, I can see that too. You know, one thing that came up for me, even if you haven't read the pages or not, one thing that she talks about, or that she mentions a lot, almost damn near on every page, is someone either being fat, obese, skinny, fracture. Like, she mentions weight. Weight is a big thing for her.
Yeah.
And I wonder where that comes from. Is there a father's like obsession with her being good at tennis? I'm sorry, Ron, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's what I was going to say. She is an athlete, and, you know, and she's attractive. So that might have something to do with it. I don't know.
What do you? Yeah,
you know, in general, I don't think, you know, just because you're an athlete, you might look down on somebody who's overweight. But, you know, that is like a segment, you know, in our society, fit people, the race of fit people, you know, and how they walk.
No, I never thought about that before, ever.
And how we walk through life.
No, I've never.
You know, passing judgment on others.
Yeah, that also caught my attention. Sorry, this is Jacqueline. Good evening. That also caught my attention. I haven't been able to keep up with all the pages, but I'm closing in on the same we're supposed to be. And I noticed that too. But one thing that caught my attention that I just wanted to mention, and I don't know if anyone else noticed, when she's using colloquial Spanish, although she's Dominican, sometimes she uses words that are not Dominican, that are colloquial. I noticed more Puerto Rican.
Can you point that out?
Well, there was one particular vulgarity that she uses referring to the woman's private. And the word that she uses, that is not Dominican at all. That's very Puerto Rican. And we make a big distinction because it's so different from what we say to that. So that really caught my attention because she said it many times. And if she's speaking from a Dominican voice, that's not how we would say it. But definitely I knew exactly what it is because of the fact that I grew up in New York City, and we have access to all this information about how other people use words, colloquially and just vulgarity overall. We know how everybody says something, but we don't necessarily use it. And
you're Dominican, Jacqueline, right?
That is correct. Yes. So that caught my attention a little bit. I guess there's that influence maybe, but also remember when we read Angie's Cruz's book that she was the first one to say, I'll tell you, Spanish is not my first language. Like some things she did out of research and just maybe hearing it, but not, didn't know exactly how. So that I think it's interesting because you definitely see how we're influenced by each other when we're in
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that and brought that into the space, because you know what, last week I remember, not saying that you're policing Dominican slang or Dominican words, but I feel you on that, because I remember last week we were kind of discussing how I was like policing hip hop and how she was so attached to hip hop, you know. I'm like, hold on, you know. And so, but you know what? I really think it is, and I think it makes a really good point that the way she grew up, where she grew up, especially at the time she grew up, it's almost, I mean, argue with me somebody if this isn't true, but it's almost as if no matter what you believe, if you grew up according to that time, in that time frame, in that space in New York City, you're never just one thing.
Right. No, I totally agree with you, because there's sometimes when Dominicans are not aware that that's not how they say it back home.
I'm sorry.
But they learn how to say it like that, and it just becomes that for them. You know what I'm saying? So let's say if you learn how to say something and you're growing up and you haven't spent too much time in your own country, you don't know that back home they don't say it like that. You think that's how you say it. Because I have some words that happened to me, because I grew up, you know, in Jersey City in early 80s, and there was a lot of Puerto Ricans. So a lot of things I learned how to say for the first time in that way, and until someone would tell me, oh, but we don't say that, and I didn't know that. I thought I was just saying it in Spanish. But it's the choice of words, because sometimes it's colloquial, sometimes it's a choice of words that we have for different things. And that's the beauty about Spanish, that you can have so many ways of saying things, and none of it. Yeah, exactly.
Me the same thing. I'm Panamanian. And I had to get used to the different Spanish, you know, in New York City. You know, I call something one thing and Puerto Ricans call it something else. Dominicans call something, and Mexican call. And it's like, okay, so you learn all of these different words for that one item, you know, that I could totally relate to what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
there's no wrong Spanish. Sorry.
And even that, but could y'all, I even want to break it down, even fine tune it even more. Like, I remember when I first came to New York, when I was maybe like 17 or 18. And I was just like with some friends. I think everybody was pretty much maybe either Jamaican American or Black American. And I remember it was like a spades game going on. I'm from Michigan, right? And this is funny. There was a spades game happening, and someone asked me, like, you know how to play spades, right? And I'm like, yes, of course. And so I sit down, and like the way Black people play spades, the card game spades in Michigan is a bit different than how people play it in New York. For example, a deuce of diamonds is a spade, right? That's like considered a spade in the game of spades that people in New York play. And I think that's really specific to people in New York. So I remember like playing that card like first, and everyone was like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
yeah. And they're like, no, that's not how we do things here. That's not how we do things here. And I remember them really like checking my Blackness in a way that I had never like, I was like, hold on, you know, like I never had to defend my Blackness before until that day on the spades table, you know, and I was like, right, you know, so like we can even fine tune that, right? These growing up in different spaces, but kind of being the same, it would be so much easier, honestly, if we just shared cultures, if we didn't have any problem just sharing. Like, I think that.
And not thinking your culture is better than another culture, because at the end of the day, we all come from pretty much the same place, just sprinkled throughout the world.
I think about that often, about how different things would look if we didn't have any problem sharing.
Because I think of what everybody, the rest of the world calls tostones. I know it's patacones.
Right.
And I didn't know what a tostón was. I was like, what is that? And they explained to me, and I was like, what do you do to the plantain? I was like, oh no. I said, I don't know. And when I saw them make it, I said, oh, those are patacones. And they look at me like, patacu? And I'm like, yeah, we call it patacones. I was like, oh, well, we call it tostones. I said, you see, one thing everybody else calls it something different, but it ended up being the same food, you know? Mm-hmm. And I just saw, I think it was Venezuela, they made patacones like a bread to make part of a sandwich. And I'm like, now I'm 2022, I'm learning another way how patacones are made. You know, second time I'm hearing the word, but it was a battle. Oh no, those are not patacones. So I'm like, you know what? Spanish is so, because everybody comes from a Spanish-speaking country, they believe that their Spanish is derivative from Spain. And I'm like, you know, everyone was told that. But at the end of the day, we all speak Spanish, okay?
And God forbid you're Caribbean and then you're called informal or improper Spanish, bad Spanish. We speak bad Spanish.
But not even that. It doesn't matter. From when I came in 1978 to now, I speak Spanish, the room gets quiet. It's like, she speaks Spanish? Because there's like, people are talking and they're thinking, if I hear, oh, mira esa muchacha, ¿qué le pasa? And I go, ¿con quién habla? It's like, what? It's like the whole conversation. I'm like, yeah, see. And they're
it's like a spy is in the room.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute. Why didn't you say something? Why do I have to?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, why do I have to bring out my Latina because you just assumed I don't look like your typical Latina.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, I haven't read the book any pages at all. Ron and I just go way back, way back.
But this is how the book club works. You know, it can be about the book, but not necessarily. So,
right. So,
and I mean, what you're saying though really is the book. Like, and I'm like, what you're saying really.
And I'm hearing, you know, with her issue with weight, and you know, I'm thinking, was she athletic all the time? Maybe she had a weight issue.
No, not in the book. She doesn't, at least up to where we read.
Okay, what I'm saying, the author herself.
Yeah,
maybe she was getting to where she is, she had to conquer her weight. So now, because she's able to maintain her weight, she looks down now on people that are not able to. But you don't know people's backstory.
Yeah,
you don't know why someone cannot control their weight, or why someone has weight on that you don't know that person has been working hard at it and they're not able to meet what is healthy. I know skinny people, thin people that are worse off health-wise than I am. So you don't know what health, you can designate what health is unless the doctor says, you know, or you feel everything, all your organs are intact and whatnot.
And it might be just a coincidence that we are noticing her writing about, you know, at least when she comments on it, it does seem to be like in a negative light. You know, and she does take note, not just of weight, but just in bodies in general, which, you know, as far as being descriptive is, you know, you can understand. But so that's a question for her next week. And for those of you who just came this week, Raquel Cepeda will join us next week in the conversation. So if you can make it back, please do. But yeah. And I'm sorry, Brandon.
Oh no, go ahead.
I'm just also struck in a good way by the pacing of the book. I mean, it is all over the place. And 1 minute there was another Raquel in the book, and I'm like, wait a minute, why is she? I thought she was talking in the third person, but it's actually another character, another person, because this is a memoir, another person in the book named Raquel, and it threw me for a second until I kind of caught up.
Yeah, same here. It definitely moves very, very fast. I guess that's probably how her life was moving too at the time.
Yeah, because there's a lot going on in her life.
Yeah.
You know, it's the two households, and one's in Boston and New York. There are all these characters. It's the boyfriend and the boyfriend's mom, who becomes her surrogate mom, and Blanca and Negro. And
I can't even keep up. I'm so like, it's so many. There's a lot.
Maria.
You know, who's consistent is Alice, who almost seems like a shadow, her stepmother, and Poppy. people
Yeah.
she lives with. And he just seems to get worse by the day. And you know, it's so interesting to me how people describe their parents looking back. She doesn't seem very happy with him, but at the same time, she doesn't leave, you know. She could go to her mother's house, but she hates it there too, you know, with all of those kids just kind of running around, running amok.
Yeah.
And you know what I thought was also really interesting? The fact that her father is kind of was, you know, painted as this person who kind of hates himself and kind of is trying to be somebody else. And her mother kind of adopts that as well. She says she's speaking with a Boston accent, even though she's from DR. And so it's very interesting. That was interesting to me, kind of how both of her parents are fighting to be other people. She really has no connection with them at all.
Yeah, and even at a young, I mean, she's still, even though it's reading like she's older, she is still, she's still relatively young. Like she's in junior high, at least in these pages. She's, I guess, in junior high, going to high school, or just in high school. But I can never tell with Catholic school what grades they are. But yeah, so she does, again, this is the writer of an autobiography, a memoir, and how they present themselves. So you always sort of present sort of like older than you are, because we're sort of, you know, using her adult situation to judge how she is as a teenager, you know, but she's like, as a teenager, she's getting into fights. She almost gets thrown out of school. She has sex for the first time. I can't remember the guy's name. Tony? Anthony?
I think it was Angel. Maybe he said Angel. I'm not quite sure. But I just know he changed. I don't know if y'all peeped it in the book, but her first boyfriend, Angel, like changes, like goes somewhere and like
he goes to college. Yeah.
He gets hit with the 5%ers. Yeah. And he changed his name to like, what was it? It was something so ridiculous. It wasn't ridiculous, it was just funny.
That's their name. They always make up those names. Knowledge like, born or something.
It was like 2 nouns. It just didn't make sense. But
knowledge understanding or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. And it did remind me of kind of like what we call people today is like hoteps, that personality.
Yeah, exactly. They were the original 5%ers were the original hoteps.
There you go.
And it was interesting though, because I think he goes to Philadelphia because he's going to Temple University. Mm-hmm. And you don't think of people going to college to join you know, the 5% nation. You think of people like, you know, being in Harlem, hanging out, and they join the 5%ers. Not somebody who goes away to college to you know, to get involved with an organization like that. It's interesting though.
His name was, he changed his name to Infinite Reality.
Infinite Reality. Yeah. And then everybody's a white devil when he comes back. Which is, you know, again, that's kind of part of the line that they always give. Not to say that white people can't be devils, but you know, they all can be devils. It gets kind of crazy after a while.
Definitely.
But they stick together though. I mean, like she doesn't, when he comes back and she hears this, she understands what it is because of rap music and like Brand Nubians and others. But she doesn't, at least, I only read up to like 120 or something like that. She doesn't leave him right away. And you know, well, they're not really that different in age, because I think he goes to college and she's a senior in high school. So I guess that's no big thing.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. He like gets a new girlfriend, and she finds out because she calls or goes up there to see him, I think. Mm-hmm. And then she like calls his dorm room, and like another girl answered the phone, and some like 5% parlance is like, "Oh, my king's not available."
Oh, all right.
Spoiler alert.
So she's heartbroken.
Mm-hmm. But she does her own fair share of dibbling and dabbling. It says at the end of the pages we read that she steps out on her boyfriend and has a baby.
Oh, okay. And I know, yeah, earlier on in these chapters, although she gets shot down mercifully by that white kid, the tennis, she has a crush on a tennis dude. And he says something like, "You could be my housekeeper," or something to that effect, which had a twofold feeling to me. On the one hand, it felt like she has a little privilege because she gets this scholarship to go to this tennis school, But then on the other hand, she's not fitting in because other people are talking about her, to her face. I think there's another couple of boys that talk about they only date Japs, Jewish American princesses, which is like, and Raquel feels like it's directed at her. And then it's this other guy who says, "Yeah, you can be my housekeeper," or something like that, which is kind of crazy, but true. As far as how people talk to each other, or talk about, people they don't want in their circle or don't believe is worthy of their circle.
Right. I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? Like being in predominantly white spaces and then hearing slurs or things that make you uncomfortable. You don't have any recourse, there's nothing you really can do.
I mean, even in that moment, right? Like it felt like she wasn't seen as like a desirable, like marriageable partner, right? Like there's a whole bunch of like conversations there about the intersections of gender and race in that moment in class. And so like he says something about like, we could fool around together because you could be my housekeeper, right? So even like this hypersexualizing of her and devaluing of her at the same time, like he sees her potential as somebody he can like sleep around with as he pursues his like Jewish American princess, right? So like even like, because I think of that even with like Raquel and having like even not like space for forgiveness for her father, but like has a lot of like frustration and anger towards her mother. It seems like for seemingly like choosing men above her and choosing relationships above her. And so I don't know, the book just has like a lot of gender politics stuff in there, like a lot of gender politics, gender stereotype stuff, a lot of like race politics, stereotype stuff. And it all seemed like bubbling up in that moment and made me think about other parts of the book as well. So.
And she has no empathy for her mom.
No.
Mom having
right.
children.
Let's talk about empathy.
No.
I wrote that down. I wrote that word down.
Let's not one ounce.
No, no, not at all.
What is up with that? Because it kind of is a buzzkill. Like, what is up with that? Is it because her father is the primary caregiver and he has so much hate for her mom and that it just like naturally maybe just spilled on her a little bit? Because I mean really, the mom never really did anything to her that we read. There was that scene where she's like, "Oh, you can go live with your dad, go to hell," and she's like 7 years old. There was that painful scene, but outside of that, I mean, she's seen her mom like 5 times in her whole life, so it's like, where is this strong disdain coming from?
I mean, I wonder how much of that for me, it seemed like a lot, to some degree, some internalized misogyny. Like people in her life don't seem to value women. And I think it's really easy to get into a place yourself where you start to believe what they believe and then devalue yourself and devalue the women in your life. Because I mean, like, her parents equally like weren't like the best in terms of like parenting approaches, but that like lack of empathy and, like you said, disdain for her mom was like just notable in a way. Like, you know, her father was physically abusive. And she still comes back. She like circles back to him at points, and there's just seems to be a space for forgiveness for men, even maybe an expectation like that maybe men like are gonna do you wrong, and so there's space for forgiveness because it comes to be expected. And like for women, it just moves very different for her. And I don't know how much of that is like, you know, she has seen people not care about women, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get one, I'm sorry, Ron, we don't get one positive, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't get one positive female lead, which is very stark different. If I would say stark different from all of the other books that we have read in this book club. Where usually it's this very, very strong, empathetic, nurturing, caring, hardworking, usually Latina woman, mom, sister, cousin, friend, nurse, housekeeper, all of that. She sews, she cooks, she does everything. We don't get that mom. We don't get that woman in this book. We don't get that woman at all in this book. We don't get any strong women in this book. But at the same time, all of the men, it almost seems like all of the men, not only are they forgiven, like Alyssa was saying, but there's absolutely no need for accountability anywhere, it seems. Like the police are called because the beatings are getting so bad, and there's no rhyme or reason. Alice is just kind of floating about like, oh, you know, there's no, the women, their character development is kind of going like this, where the men is just kind of, the men in the book just kind of flatline, you know?
She does sort of reference that this is cultural, that within the Dominican culture, men are dominant. And to a certain extent, for that to exist, the women have to buy into it. I'm not saying that they buy into it in a good way, but you know, how we raise our sons or young men, and whether the mothers, and again, I'm just referring to how she sort of frames Dominican men. It almost feels like she's blaming the culture, no individual, but just the culture. You know, Dominican men cheat, and Dominican men have children out of wedlock, and Dominican men are, you know, potentially violent. And can't imagine that's universal, but
yeah,
this is how this is how she's painting it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there's no need for accountability because this is the DNA. You know? Would you blame a cow for its spots? No, you wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. This is just how it is, you know, and you accept it or you don't accept it, but you can't change it.
Right, but I think that's a continuation of her lack of empathy. Yeah. Because still you would expect, like you said, the character development of the women, they all kind of fall flat. It's just more people and more people. I think that the more recent one, Maria, I think is the mother of Angel, is it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just starting to get there. She's kind of sees the mother that she had prayed for. And I'm waiting to see where that's going to go. But she also says, oh, she has Maria, the name of so many immigrants, and just goes on about the name. And I think everybody is one-sided. There's only one side to every character, and it's plopped on them, and then you don't see it go anywhere, from what I've seen so far. So I'm still kind of waiting.
I don't think it goes well for Maria. Isn't she cheated on?
Are we gonna give it away?
Well,
yeah.
no, that's the page within the pages that we're supposed to be reading now. But I know I haven't gone to that. But yeah, well, she's the one that had the 3 kids with 3 different
men.
So, but that's way before page 130, and I did not get there, so I'll stop there.
Oh, it's totally fine, because that's you're absolutely right. But I can tell you right now, it doesn't end well for her either. She goes down too. She goes down, and it's everybody who has a little light or something. Even some of the little girls she meets in school, they all have this terrible either self-loathing or it's just bad. there isn't one, and I had hope for her grandparents back in the DR that she kept saying mama and papa, but never there's a point where she tries to reach back. She says it's been years since she spoke to them, so even herself is sort of lacking in one dimension, like so yeah, I'm kind of feeling like they just kind of fizzle or go downhill. No, that's a really kind of perfect critique of the pages so far. And I would even take it a step further and say that perhaps that is a direct, because it's not very satisfying to read, but when I think about it, I think perhaps that is a direct reflection, that kind of fizzling out that Jacqueline mentioned, that's a direct reflection of the people in her life, at that time.
Right.
Either she was physically fighting with them, or they would just kind of like come and go. Like the Jewish guy comes and goes. Her mom comes and goes. All of her friends kind of come and go. Like everything she has really no solid foundation at all. She hates tennis, and yet it's such a big part of her life, but she talks about how much she hates it, So I 100% agree with you.
But I'm also wondering whether, and it kind of just touches on what you just said, like, this is not about her writing style. This is about her life, that these people were, coming in and out of her life this quickly, because in all this time, I mean, all these characters in these pages, I don't even think a year passes. You know what I mean? It's not like we have looked at a span of her life, like from her teens to her middle age. This is just like maybe a year, because she is where I read up to, she is just entering her senior year in high school. And I don't think it starts too much earlier than that, at least these pages.
Well, I guess it's also appropriate to the genre, because it is a memoir, and a memoir is basically how you remember it and how that short space and how you experienced it. So maybe we're really looking at those chunks of memories, like without a lot of depth to them. I don't know.
I agree with both of y'all, but there are some times I'm like, why don't you expand on this? Like there's the point where she's talking about how it's towards the end. It's like on the last page that we were supposed to read, I think. And she's talking about how it's like the last 2 paragraphs. She's talking about how she got into what she's actually known in the world for, and that's being a journalist and writing these music reviews. And it's literally like 2 paragraphs. So it's like, I agree that I believe that it's like kind of people just coming in and out. She has, I mean, it's sad almost, but at the same time, I would like to hear more about what she was listening to at the time. We get a couple of snippets. She does mention Tribe Called Quest. She does mention the Brand Nubians and Lord Jamar. She does mention a couple, people, but for her to be able to be writing about, I used to write music reviews, and I used to just have to listen. I used to just listen to music all day long. Like if it came out in 2013, between 2016, I know it. Like, and I was immersed in it, So I would have liked just almost a soundtrack, if you will, to go along with this. Like, for example, Ron, really quickly, can you remember, like, if you had to write a soundtrack to your life in 1980, I don't know, 8, would you be able to like pinpoint what you were listening to?
I don't think so. You know why?
Really? Would anybody be able to?
I was listening to a lot of jazz in the 80s and 90s. Old jazz.
No, nobody?
Yeah, I mean, I just cannot pinpoint the year, but I know like the era.
I would have to look at the charts to see what music
And I love music. I listen to every kind of music, and music really identifies. It's just that I have a hard time with the year. Just know about the time.
But you know what era you would be in. Oh yeah, me too, Alyssa.
Right there she's right there in my era. Everything she mentions, like at the beginning of hip hop, and just like we talked about it last week, how it just kind of changed everything. It was a sound that built bridges, I think, at least in New York. But no, I couldn't say exactly years and things like that.
Oh man, in high school I could give you a full soundtrack, no problem. A, B side remix, not at all. Like,
well, you know, but that's your training. You used to write, so that's ingrained in you for sure.
You know, those times when she goes to Washington Square Park are interesting, you know, when she goes down and she's running into different rappers, and she, you know, she sees Russell, and she sees what's that other group that was part of Native Tongues?
It wasn't the Beat. I've never heard of them. I'm sorry, I've never heard of that group she mentioned.
No, you've heard of them. They're from Long Island.
Not the Beastie Boys. What's the Beastie Boys?
Potholes in My Lawn.
Never heard of them.
No, she does.
No, Brandon. I ain't even accepting that you
never heard of them.
Hang on,
mentioned that, and I was like, who are they?
Hang on, Brandon. I don't have the name right.
I'm looking for it too.
I never heard of them.
What was the name?
Hold on.
Something about potholes.
De La Soul.
Oh, De La Soul.
De La Soul.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, but she does. I don't know if she calls them De La Soul.
However you want it. However
she calls them by their name.
Oh, okay.
True Boy, and Pastanus.
Yeah, that's what she says.
Yeah.
And okay.
Like, no way, Brandon. You know De La Soul.
Of course.
Name the group. Don't give me no name and no part of group. Name the title of the whole group.
Right.
Yes, exactly. I didn't know who she was talking about. I was like, why did she even name drop this? You know, like it's
that part I found interesting though. I mean, just to be sort of like tangible in the culture, and going to like I never went to Washington Square Park as a kid, for no big reason, but it just like I just wasn't traveling from the Bronx to hang out in a park downtown Manhattan. But you know, she did. You know, I mean, where she lived in Washington Heights is as far north as, you know, I was in the Bronx. So I'm sure a lot of people felt like they had to, you know, make a pilgrimage to Washington Square Park. It just never excited me.
Yeah, you're right. Those kind of moments were really
and they felt different from the rest of the book. They weren't like fraught with potential violence and and adultery, you know. It felt youthful. It felt more in line with who she was, hanging out with her friends and, you know, talking mess and things like that. But she's also aspirational then. That's when she talks about being a writer and writing rap lyrics and things like that. You know, it felt her age. It felt like a young person recognizing that there's something bigger than their neighborhood.
But I grew up I'm just about her age, I guess, on her time. And definitely Washington Square Park. I wasn't in Washington Heights. I was in Jersey City. But there was a lot going on in Washington Square Park and for everybody. There was always like a little corner for everybody. And that's where the dancers will come in the center and put on shows, break dancers. That's when I saw a lot of, for the first time, break dancing. So I could relate to that part of it. But again, I wasn't coming up from all the way, Jersey City that's really close for me.
Yeah, it's close.
Yeah. And my cousins up in the Heights, we're not going to no Washington Square Park either. We're not going to make it. That's a hike.
That's a hike. At least it's just one train, though. I will say that. It's one train, but that's a long train ride.
Yeah. Sometimes when I've been, this is kind of an aside, one night, it was late or early, and I was walking through Washington Square Park, and I see this huge crowd gathered around the fountain. And there's dudes in there wrestling in their underwear.
Like, wait, in the fountain?
In the fountain. In the fountain. And they were wrestling, like challengers,
Yeah.
You want to wrestle, you wrestle that guy. I was like, yo.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
I have a good, let's share stories, because I have a good Washington Square Park story. When I was in college, like my boyfriend at the time was a drummer, and he was actually really good, and he sometimes would like play in the park with this like group of guys from the Bronx who like would like do flips over each other and like all like acrobatic like stuff.
That's definitely Washington Square Park. Yep.
And so he would play like the drums for them, and they would like attract the crowd and like dance and do like these flips and stuff. And one time, like I had met him out there. I was like in the city, and I had met him over there, and I'm like, just kind of waiting till they wrap up the show so we can leave. And I didn't know this. I don't know why I thought they were just like wholesome guys, but they weren't. They were like street dudes, and they hustled like this family out of like $200.
Oh, crap.
And I mean, it was in front of everybody, it was like everyone watched it, and they were like tourists. It was like a white family. They were tourists, and they came back with the NYPD. And I'm just kind of like sitting there, like waiting for the show to be over. And like, they just, like, it was like something out of a movie. I didn't realize what was going on. I just kind of like looked up, and they were hopping over me, like to run away. Like they were in the show. They would flip over each other in the show, but they were like jumping over me. I had to like kneel down and like pretend that I kind of wasn't with them. We like got the drums and like run away. So does anyone else have any Washington Square Park stories? This is kind of interesting.
Well, after my wedding ceremony in Jersey City, we spent the night before we flew to our honeymoon. We got it. It was a beautiful hotel. Oh God, it's closed down. But anyways, that was where my husband and I first spent our first date married. So that's definitely very memorable for me. And I ran into a lot of actors. Like I would just hang out in the park, and there was after the gay parade in the village, there was always a good hangout, and I always ran into like the All My Children cast, different actors, and just kind of seeing different things. So it has a nice place for me. To me, it's New York.
Yeah,
I love it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I really felt connected to her when she was in the park, and I wish she had stayed, not in the park, but in that area of rap music, because you can even feel like it feels more vibrant when she's talking about, listening to music on her Walkman, going to school or whatever, If
I think that's the one positive. Sorry, that's like the one positive in her life. from her perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember that. Like, I remember feel like that's one thing I connect with her on. I remember feeling like that. Like when music came out in high school, it's like I didn't care what was going on in the world because like Jay-Z had just dropped like in this album, you know. So I remember like that feeling and being like idolizing artists, your favorite artists, and like seeing everything they do. Like you only get that time once. You know, really in your life, unless you become like a lifer, if you will. I know a few lifer fans. I know a few lifer like Nicki Minaj fans, Mariah Carey fans. Like they've been fans so long, like the artists actually know them.
Yeah,
you know, the Barbs. Some Mariah Carey has some too. She has some really solid individuals that really ride for her. So yeah, you only get that time once.
No, you don't. When I was a kid, I can clearly remember exactly where I was the first time I heard hip hop on the radio. It felt like men landed on Mars. It felt so foreign to have like this music of the streets suddenly, you know, playing on the radio. And I know for someone like you, Brandon, hip hop has always been on the radio. But for me, like I was 15 the first time I heard hip hop on the radio. And it was like a big thing. Like I was like, what? That's crazy.
Well, it's also interesting because you kind of got to watch it as a young kid.
Yeah, I was hearing hip hop for about I don't want to say 10 years, but the first time I started what they call now hip hop was probably 73. And hip hop as we know it started in the 80s.
Right.
You know, at least popular hip hop started in the 80s. I had an aunt that lived in Bronx River Houses, and that's the home of Zulu Nation. So sometimes if I used to visit her, I used to hear these dudes in the hall beatboxing. It wasn't called beatboxing back then. To me, it was noise. because I was into Al Green and Teddy Pendergrass. And then this was also, a lot of people don't remember, this is like the beginning of like brass music, like brass construction and confunction, where they had these bands that had like, they might have like 10 horn players, average white band. And rap just decimated all that. Rap just moved all that music, you know, to the side. So it was an interesting time to like, you know, be listening to music.
And I can, you know, Alyssa said something in the chat that we kind of brought up a little last week. Felt like the music was a form of escapism, coping, therapy for folks navigating trauma. Alyssa, if you want to talk a little more about that, please do. But like that, to me, definitely, that's why I wanted to know more songs and artists and like who exactly she was listening to.
Yeah, like I mean, I was listening to Ron and even thinking of how like music can be so memorable. Like we remember like where we heard a song, what it meant to us. Like it's like this visceral emotional connection that we often feel with music. And so it just seemed like for her, music was this place where she could be free. And there were so many places in her life that she was constrained, like at home with her family, just navigating school and like hoping teachers would take an interest in her writing ability even and like what she was capable of. And it just seemed like music was the place, even the relationship towards the end that you had mentioned earlier she gets pregnant, and like music for her is that way of even being free from a relationship that's convenient, that she needs for like housing and stability, but not one that she wants or desires. It seemed to even be the place where she was able to have a desire, or she was able to have wants and needs and just exist. So it was interesting to see her emotional relationship to music throughout the course of time, and her like turning it into a career even. And it was interesting.
Yeah, no, and also kind of just piggybacking off what you just said, it also really, to me, fight me if I'm wrong, but to me, it kind of also really gave away her sexism, her misogyny in a way. Not that I was counting, but she mentions very, very few female artists. It's all men. It's all really like all men, really masculine.
But Brandon, to her credit,
I want to hear some women.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point. Like, because I already like I don't know, and like I almost feel like as like I would consider myself to be like an avid music listener. I like music. Like even to say like I know it's a contentious thing to be like, you know, some folks will say like hip hop is like masculinist and there's a male dominated, and then you have other folks who will say, well, like if you listen to enough of it, you will hear women who rap. Like if you're really a fan of it and you go into like the underground, you have artists that like today do a lot of like Black feminist work in music, right? Like you have like Nitty Scott. She wasn't listening to those artists. She was specifically listening, and I don't know if it's even like her own internalized misogyny that drew her to those artists, or how much of like music shaped also influenced what she thought about the women in her life. I don't know like where the relationship began and ended. It was a really good point. I don't have an answer, but it made me think of a lot of things.
I'm going to come. Jacqueline, were you going to say something?
No. I was just agreeing.
I'm going to come to her defense a little bit because she does reference Moni Love. And she references Queen Latifah, I believe, also. But also,
I don't remember that.
No, but definitely Moni Love. But also, we got to remember there weren't a lot of women rapping in the 80s into the 90s. That's all.
Which is why I think it's odd that she was like, oh, I want to write for like those male artists instead of like something else.
She is like connected to pop culture. Those Black men were pop culture. They were.
I mean, maybe. There is, I don't know anything about being a cool Black man, but I'm sure it's really fun and like,
I'm telling you what it's like.
You know what I think? I think, and this is, I could be wrong, I could be reading way too into this, but I think that there's no women artists at all really mentioned in this book as her inspiration, coupled with the lack of empathy she has for her mother and almost every other woman around her. I think that's what we really see like shaping this misogyny that we're talking about. I don't think it's inherent. I think it's learned behavior. Her father, I mean, I don't know if he hates women, but I know he hits her, and I know he really doesn't have a relationship with his wife or the father of his child or the mother of his child.
Or any woman for that matter.
Or any woman for that matter. Yeah.
And none of the men in the book really have monogamous leanings. It seems like they are all potential. There's another character in the book that has like multiple children. Is it Maria's husband? Who has like multiple children?
It's Maria's husband, and then while they're together, this is Jacqueline, this is what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
While they're together, he has another kid.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's her, I mean, it's not her literal home, but that's the place where she is spending more time than anywhere else. And she kind of credits Maria for sort of centering her, you know, giving her this sort of place of stability and things like that. So
yeah, Maria was the hope for her to have any empathy or like towards, you know, a female character.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of shatters. So then it's like
exactly.
Yeah.
We're back to square one almost.
Right.
She definitely has a
she references Menudo. Did you notice that?
She does.
She referenced Menudo a couple of times. Another male group, but anyways. But who's counting?
I was keeping score for sure. No, she does. She mentions them often.
Yes.
But you know, again, you're a young woman in the 80s. Menudo is God.
Oh yes.
You know? Manure is God. So.
Yep. Trust me, I know. Yeah.
But you know, sometimes when we read texts like this, again, this is like my repetitive criticism of biographies and memoirs, is that we give the writers more intelligence and more gravity than they may have. You know, we want her to be quote unquote woke and recognize patriarchy and fight against it and don't accept, you know, this kind of stereotype around or types around Dominican men. We want her to sort of verbalize or at least write it how it should be. She may have been a victim of it as much as anyone else, you know, as any other man or woman in that neighborhood at that time. Because that's a real, you know.
I think that's a great point. Yep.
Washington Heights is really Dominican. Like, it's not a little Dominican.
No,
it's
no.
It's really Dominican, you know?
Yeah, you
like
could grow up Dominican. You could grow up Dominican, maybe haven't been to DR ever. And if you grew up in the Heights, you're still going to have a really, you know, good idea. I mean, you're going to, it's like if you're growing up there. So, definitely.
But she really had the advantage because she did kind of grow up there. Not grow up. She spent a few years.
A few years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was kind of what made it even more interesting, that she was a bit more American than even, or she kind of got the best of both worlds more than anybody it seemed like she went to school with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, there's a point where she like enters high school. There's a word that they call the new Dominican immigrants. It might be what's that, Jack?
Hick.
But it's like a Spanish word. Hick ain't Spanish.
Well, that's the one that I remember she used. It's the one.
Yeah, she does use that word a few times, and it's kind of like
her friends here chastise her for hanging out with, like, you know,
it starts with a C. What is it, Jacqueline? It starts with a C. I think I know what you're talking about.
I wonder.
And I thought that was interesting.
Is it campesino?
Oh, campesino. Okay.
Campesino,
but that's
campesina?
Is that a racial slur? Did I just say a racial slur? What
is that? It means you're from the country. Campesina means you're from the country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And her other friends are making fun of her for wanting to hang out with these sort of new Dominican immigrants, and Raquel kind of like, she describes what they look like. You know, they might have, they're loud with jerry curls. They're not wearing socks even in the winter. And it just felt like even though she is hanging out with them, she is also, you know, making light of them, you know, at the same time, which is something we all do with kind of, you know, what you called originally Hicks, you know, because we all have that in our family.
Yeah, but that's like in our culture, at least, it's like a newer thing. Whereas I didn't grow up where Dominicans here were calling Dominicans newcomers names. And as a teacher, I come across that and I was taken aback. I was like, what? There's discrimination against Dominicans that have been here for a long time or were born here towards the Dominicans that are newcomers. And I wasn't born here and I grew up. I've never experienced that. I don't recall a time in my growing up where I experienced it. I think that's like a new thing.
I think you're right. And I'll tell you, Jacqueline, I just wrapped up like a year-long contract researcher job on this documentary that's coming out about what's going on at the border, what's been going on at the border. And what we found is that a strong percent, 75% of Mexican Americans, but like third generation, had very conservative views on immigration.
Yeah. On immigration.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So I think
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I said, I guess if you live long enough, you're going to see it. As I migrated here in the 70s. So, I hadn't, in my generation, my children are the first generation being born here. And I had never experienced anything like that. And as a teacher, as an adult, it's just so sad. But I guess they're getting to be where they are that second, even third generation. So I guess your research this proves your research. And I have read about it. I have heard about it in other cultures. I just never experienced it as a Dominican, and you don't expect to see it. But I guess it's a process of becoming. And when you're in a place long enough, I think you start to have that entitlement and think that, you're the shit. So
that's part of being American.
Yeah. It's either that or it's either a choosing thing. You're choosing one side over the other. You know what I'm saying? It's
I guess anywhere you're there long enough, and you start to develop that, like I call it entitlement. Like, oh, now you belong here. Now you're from here, and whoever comes is an outsider, even if they come from your lineage and they're yours. But I don't know. I had not seen it until I became a teacher, and with the Dominicans, I've heard them calling other newcomers. But I had heard it in other cultures, so I knew it happened. I've read about it a lot with the Cubans. When the Marielitos started to come in, there was a lot of objection from the established Cubans, right? The ones that were here for a long time, and they really rejected. They did not want to be compared to that, and so I knew about it. You just don't expect that it's going to happen to your own culture.
I mean, the Great Migration, there's a really big story that is done. Not a lot of people talk about with the Black Americans really looking down on Black Americans from the North, from Michigan, New York, Illinois, really looking down on people coming up from the Great Migration when never anywhere before, especially, this is the kicker, in the church. That was the biggest form of discrimination because Black people in the South praised really loudly, like praise and worship, whereas people in the North were more conservative at church. A lot here in New York started. A lot of discrimination amongst Black people, amongst other Black people coming up from the South. That's where we really see it in New York.
I mean, even now with African immigrants versus African Americans, you see it now, particularly not with our elected officials, but these systems, these party systems that elect people to office. They are oftentimes, there might be an African organization and an African American organization, Even there, it is still, divided. We just can't, unless it's someone like Donald Trump, that you either galvanize or you might die. Like this upcoming election, I'm nervous. Like right now, Donald Trump will win.
I said that too, Ron. I said that too.
Gotta get a new passport out of here.
That's scary.
It's crazy.
I said that same thing.
It's scary. It's scary. Thinking back to when I came here and the fact that being Panamanian and American Blacks frowned upon you because they figure you come and you're taking the jobs. It's like, how am I taking your job? We both would apply for the same job.
Right.
It's just the best person is going to get the job. They're not giving me, then I say, oh yeah, you get the job. I like you best. We both go for the job and they just choose the person that's qualified for the job. But even that, and even, moving forward, you figure over the years, you come to realization that, you know what? I may be Black from Panama, but at the end of the day, I'm still looked upon as a Black person because I go in the store, heads still turn. People still follow me behind. I go in the store. I can't go to the store and nobody goes, oh, may I help you? No, may I help you? I'm good. May I help you? I'm okay. May I help you? It's like, I don't need your help. You know, you still, even my parents as an educator also, when they meet the Spanish teacher, where did you learn Spanish? I said, no, you should ask me where I learned English. And then yeah, I didn't learn Spanish. Spanish is my language. Spanish is my borrowed language because I don't know what the actual language my ancestors spoke, because Columbus sprinkled us all over the world. Then they really go, oh shoot. Then they really back off, because now I'm letting you feel uncomfortable, because now you're trying to make me feel uncomfortable, but I'm gonna let you feel uncomfortable because you're wrong. I said, you know, whatever Columbus did, this is why I look this way, but I speak Spanish. But I probably spoke on my ancestors probably spoke on a language that I'm not familiar with. But here, what could I say? I'm here now. And they're like, and I mean, like I said, up until today, 2022, I still get that response. Spanish teacher? The kids were like, hola, Taura. And they're like, that's your Spanish teacher? Like to say, you never had that conversation. She was a woman of color. Because they just, oh, Spanish teacher. They expect to look at someone, you know, a European, Eurocentric looking person. But they, I mean, you could, even if they don't say it, sometimes you could just tell the meaning of the expressions. And I'm like, yeah, that's me.
I wonder if Raquel speaks Spanish. I think we kind of referred to that earlier, as a lot of second generation people, Spanish people from the Caribbean do not speak Spanish. It would be interesting to know if, because I think,
was she born here or was she born over there?
She was born here. But I think Jacqueline, excuse me, you referenced that early about using the Puerto Rican slang versus the Dominican slang, you know?
Right. Yes, and that could very well be the way that she learned it because of where she grew up. I just thought that was.
And I think a lot of older parents, well, I don't know how old she is, but a lot of parents also, I've noticed that, well, she's probably in that generation where a lot of parents don't teach their children the home language because they want them to get further, because they themselves came here not speaking full English. I'm not going to say proper, but full English. So now they don't want that to hold their children back because they felt that held them back. So they don't teach the children the language. And that's it. Or if they do teach the child the language, the child has some kind of embarrassment to speak amongst their peers who don't speak the language. And when the parent is speaking in that language, Spanish, French, whatever, the child responds in English. Because I had a family on the block. The mom was speaking French, blah, 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 and both kids would respond every answer in English, would never respond in French. And this was even just,
a friend of mine actually who's from the Bronx, from Soundview, his mom is Dominican, his dad is from Ecuador, and in order for his mother to learn English, that's what they did in the house. She spoke to him in Spanish, he responded in English, and like that's how she learned.
Right. And growing up, that's what my parents did. In Panama, one spoke Spanish, one spoke English. So my siblings and we grew up bilingual. I didn't know how to read it, but I knew how to speak it. And then reading wasn't that challenging because I already knew how to speak it. Now it's just putting the words, oh, that's what the word "da" looks like. It's not D-A, it's T-H-E. Interesting. And now you start, and then I have my cousin of mine, we were pen pals. She lived in California, I was in Panama, and I wrote to her in Spanish, and she wrote to me in English. So that also allowed me to learn the language. But not everyone is, I don't know, is fortunate or has the advantage, Panama being what it is, the United States having control of a part of Panama for many years, from 1900-something to 1999, a lot of Americans lived there. So there was a section in Panama that was controlled by the United States. And my parents went to school, English school and whatnot. So pretty much all the 60, 70, 80, 90-year-olds, that generation, they are all bilingual. And most of us are also bilingual, but now the generation after us, they're not bilingual. The parents didn't teach them the language.
Right.
And some of them don't understand it. Some of them may understand because they took it up in school, but they didn't learn it at home. So I always think back to when I see my Latin parents, where the mom English is shaky, but she's pushing the child to learn English because I guess she figured I was only able to accomplish, yay, I want you to go further. And because if you speak English, you could go further by speaking English. Because it's, I guess, thinking the Spanish is always going to be with you. But it's not, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think it also, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It goes back to, I think we had a conversation in a previous meeting where oftentimes the Spanish language is not valued as our other European languages. And it is seen as a deficit. And oftentimes the students, instead of thinking that they have an advantage of speaking another language, they're embarrassed but that's because it's taught, that it is taught to them that, oh, he's, or the accent is made fun of, or, but that's the mentality and the way that it's taught, instead of being taught, oh, you have an advantage because you speak 2 languages, and there's so many parts of your brains that are activated when you speak more than 1 language. That is such an advantage, but they don't see it like that. So it has to be retaught to them and made aware that you have an advantage. It's not a deficit, and you should use it. And a lot of people have changed their perspective, but unfortunately some haven't. And it's definitely an advantage that you were brought up bilingual from the beginning, because then, that makes it easier when you migrate to the US to be able to move forward, get an education, unlike other people that, let's say my parents still don't speak the language. But I think that's because he's taught that way.
And as a Spanish teacher, I try to tell my kids that being a bilingual person, I let them know, majority of the people in the US only speak 1 language. I said, if you travel across the pond, across the Atlantic, people in Spain speak Italian and probably French, maybe some German. People in Italy speak Spanish and German. And I said, they all adapt what's their surroundings, because why? They have to eventually communicate with them. I said, you speak in Spanish, you'll impress that person at the restaurant when you order your food in Spanish. You may get some extra guacamole, okay? You may get an extra jarrito. You may get a little extra something. I said, you may get dessert for free. I said, you'd be surprised how that, just say hola. People say, oh, they'll look at you like, because they don't expect it from you. I said, it's not a hinder, it's actually an advantage. I said, when you go to middle school and you decide to take French or Italian, you already have that foundation for that foreign language. Now, if you take Mandarin and Japanese, you on your own, deuces.
Right.
I tell them, you deuces, I can't help you. You on your own. And they're like, you just said that? I said, yeah. I said, I can't help you with Japanese or Chinese. Mandarin. I said, because those are characters.
Right.
We have letters. They all look the same to me. Nothing against my Asian people. Love y'all, but that is the case.
We got 8 minutes left. Did anyone want to introduce anything that we didn't get to yet? It can be something we were talking about earlier, or
and I just want to, excuse me, Brandon.
Oh no, go ahead.
I just want to remind everyone that Raquel Cepeda will join us next week. So if you do have any questions, and I always say, tell people if it's in the book, it's fair game. So don't feel like you can't ask this. The fact that whether she speaks Spanish, I think is, that's legit. Her whole music sort of playlist, that's legit. Is it male dominated for a reason? It might be related to how she was raised. I don't know. But, all these things are, why is it so fast paced? All of these things are legit questions. I know I'm going to ask at least one of them. But
no, yeah, I agree. And it's just so interesting that I know this book, I thought this book was a lot about her DNA, and she must get into that much later in the book.
Could be, yeah.
I keep waiting for that.
Yeah, I know, right? Me too, Jacqueline. I find it so interesting that you know, she really kind of doesn't have a mother figure, and she does gravitate towards these male figures. And then what happens? She ends up falling for Jamar. I know some of you haven't gotten to this place, but Jamar is basically like, you know, a controlling, manipulative person like her father. And so I think it's something so interesting to talk about. I wish we had a psychiatrist here to talk about the effects.
Maybe we do. I don't know. Do we have any psychiatrists in the room?
You can't just ask it like that. Like, it's Brooklyn in the house, you know?
Psychiatrist in the room.
Is there someone with a medical background that could facilitate this question for us?
I do wonder though, if you know, any of that, her choosing of men, you know, she chose angel or infinite reality.
You do what you know. You do what you know. Yeah. And some people are able to get out of that circle.
Yeah.
And venture out. Some people just stay in that, keep going around and round and round and can't figure that out.
Yeah, it's like she, you know, it's like that saying, we all become what we once hated, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or
like,
yeah,
she runs straight to, you know.
Or maybe she's a person that feels that I could help that person. I could have that person find your life, find the answer. Maybe she thinks she's the healer. That person that can fix it, the fix-it person.
The few physical fights she gets into are also with women, although I don't expect her to be out there fighting men, but she has a couple fights in the book and they're with women.
And she was the aggressor.
Girls.
Over men?
They weren't over men.
Women.
She was the aggressor in all of them, but she didn't have a problem getting hit because she, you know,
she's used to it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of.
Those felt like taps.
She was
fighting a woman probably felt like a tap. I suppose if her father beat her and abused
her.
And the men in her life also abused her.
I don't know if they physically abused her, but they're like cheaters. You know, they cheat.
That's a form of abuse.
Like playboys. That is a form of abuse. And you know what, though? Fidelity. She does the same thing. Not only does she take the physical abuse that she learned from her father to school, which she does, she also takes that kind of like infidelity abuse, if you will, to her own relationships, and has a kid with another man.
Who has a woman? Who has a woman?
I don't know if he has a woman.
Oh, he's in a relationship?
I haven't gotten to she hasn't divulged it yet. She just says like, this is literally how the last page ends. I slept with somebody else. I stepped out on a man, slept with somebody else and had a kid. And like, that's the end. Like, so we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Next.
So like I said, next week, so we're supposed to read pages 137 to 205, which is chapters 10 through 14. But normally what happens is when the author comes in, we just have questions for the author. We usually don't talk about the chapters that we were assigned to read. And then the following week will be our last discussion on this book. And that's when we sort of talk about, one, the conversation, but also all the other pages that we were supposed to read. So we had a small turnout tonight, but.
Well, we got just a couple minutes left. Ron, could you, if it's possible, could you, do you have available like some of her other work? She did a documentary, didn't she, on like Puerto Rican fighting, or maybe it was Dominican women?
She did a documentary on a woman who was part of this gang called the Savage Skulls. I think
if anyone is coming next week and we watch that, would that be kind of fair game to tap into her mind about that?
Definitely everything.
The documentary looks brilliant.
And she's working on a documentary now called East of Broadway, which is Broadway is the big street that, you know, as we all know, dissects all of Manhattan. But it's also a demarcation even all the way up in Washington Heights. So Yeah, definitely come through.
What is the name of the first documentary you mentioned? Skull, yeah. What?
Ron, do you have it handy? I was trying to find it and paste it in the chat, but.
Hang on, y'all.
And to me, you know, when I seen this, when I just seen the preview of this documentary that Ron's gonna find, but when I seen it, just even the preview, I thought to myself like, oh, okay, that's how she became Latina. You know, like I was like, okay, that's it. You know, like when she started, I don't know, just when you watch it, I think you'll see like, this is when she started to really find herself, you know, like.
Is that it?
La Madrina?
La Madrina?
Okay. La Madrina. Okay.
Yes, that's it.
All right, so let me just open that.
This is my neighborhood way back when the Savage Skulls were a big gang.
Lorene Padilla.
Mom always told me you're gonna be a bitch because it was a big.
Hang on, y'all. Let me try to share my screen if you want to hang out just for.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
A couple more seconds. Share screen. Can you see that?
Yep.
I would say I was born with gangsterism in my blood. Because my own a minority group member in the South Bronx had a better chance of being killed in the Bronx than they did a combat unit in Vietnam. I'm Lorene. I'm Black as white. When I became the press woman, I automatically became the first lady. I was in Rumble. I got arrested. I did some time in the name of the club. All the women there fought like dudes. It's really us, the women, that held it down. How many here back in the day carried guns? Can you raise your hand? You know, you have to look at where these kids come from. Just don't get up in the morning and say, well, this is what I'm going to do in my life. I'm going to land up in jail for the rest of my life. I'm going to shoot up drugs. No, I think I'll join a gang. One day they had some kind of protest up Lexington Avenue, and I just joined. It stirred an anger in me. It stirred activism. 2, 4, 6, 8. We the parents will not wait. This is what was in the people's mind until I got hold of it. And I said, no, it doesn't have to be this way. We came out in masses, we voiced our opinion, and we refused to take it. Don't let these dirty streets get you down. You can live in the ghetto, but don't let the ghetto live in you. Couldn't sit there and not do something. I began to work with people that were involved.
Although she had her own children, she was everyone's mom. It's a part of everyone's life.
The person that helped me out a lot was my mom, I never knew how strong you were because of you being my godmother. I need you in my life. This is why I fight with you.
Oh, nice.
So I don't know where it's streaming, but I gotta find that.
Yeah.
Isn't that powerful?
If you find it, let me know.
I will.
So thank you all for coming out.